But just talking about this uniform civil code in vacuum without having any kind of document, without any kind of proposal before us, I think it just becomes a kind of what do you call creating a kind of a kind of discourse without kind of preparations. I think that's very unfortunate, and this is a problem which is going to affect not only the religious minorities like the Christians or the Muslims or the Parsis and the others, but it is also going to very adversely going to affect the Adivasis or tribal people in India.
Friends, we are going to discuss uniform civil code and how it is going to affect the lives of Adivasi community. The debate of uniform civil code is generally presented as if that it is a communal issue. It is all about Hindu-Muslims conflict. But the fact of the matter is that uniform civil code is closely linked to constitutional structure. It is going to affect federal structure as well as all the religious groups and social groups in India. Adivasi community has come out to protest against imposition of uniform civil code. Particularly, protest has been reported from Northeast, from Mizoram, from Nagaland. Jharkhand is also coming up against this uniform civil code. This topic, which is not generally touched by mainstream media, because it is more interested in creating religious frenzy and polarizing voters ahead of the elections. Professor Virginius Xaxa is joining us today in the discussion. He is one of the most important scholar on the conditions of Adivasi tribal community. You know him very well. He is well-known sociologist. He has taught at some of the prestigious university and educational institutes of our country. He has taught at Delhi School of Economics, and also he was instrumental in setting up the center TIS in Guwahati. He retired from Tezpur University. He has written many books on Adivasi community, and most important thing is that in 2014, Virginius Xaxa headed a commission which looked into the conditions of Adivasi. The report is already out. Sir, protest is happening. Adivasi community is opposing. And even there has been a report, I just saw it, that Meghalaya Assembly has also passed regulations against Uniform Civil Code. So how do you look at Uniform Civil Code? And the government has not given any draft. Only communal polarization is happening through media. How it is going to affect the lives, the culture of Adivasi community and their special identity, sir?
Now, Abhay, first of all, you know, uniform civil code issues like this, it needs to be really very carefully thought about it, and it should be introduced at a time when people are in a kind of environment where they can easily and freely can talk about it. And I think if there was a draft, if there was a proposal, probably we would have been much better informed in terms of giving our ideas and so on and so forth. But just talking about this uniform civil code in vacuum without having any kind of document, without any kind of proposal before us, I think it just becomes a kind of what do you call creating a kind of a kind of discourse without kind of preparations. I think that's very unfortunate, and this is a problem which is going to affect not only the religious minorities like the Christians or the Muslims or the Parsis and the others, but it is also going to very adversely going to affect the Adivasis or tribal people in India. One of the interesting thing about this is that uniform civil code, primarily people really tend to think in terms of religion. but it is not at all connected with religion in the case of the tribal communities in India. It is more connected with what we will call the customary law, the traditions, the customs. That what is really is a binding. And therefore, you find that it is nothing to do with the religion as far as the tribals are concerned. And I think this really needs to be kept in mind. It is the cultural practice, the customary law that becomes more important. And it is that which tends to govern what we call the civil life, the personal, what is called the personal life of the individuals, whether you talk about, let's say, marriage or divorce or inheritance or successions and various other kinds of things. So I think, first of all, I feel that it should be asserted, it should be stated that the Uniform Civil Code that we are referring to, it has not only the religious basis, not only the religious root, but it has also a cultural roots. And in case of the tribals, it is more of the cultural root than the religious root.
You are aware of the fact that 21st Law Commission has said it without any ambiguity that we do not need Uniform Civil Code at this moment. Instead, it has stressed the need for ending gender discrimination and making laws and amending laws for giving equal property rights to women. So 3-4 years later, when the report was published in 2018, the Modi government, instead of implementing those suggestions into concrete laws, it has again started raking up the same issue. So do you feel sad that the government and the energy of administration, these are being misused?
I do feel that issues like this is need to be taken in a more in a dispassionate manner, and it is important that when a report has been submitted by the commission or report is available, I think before it is made a sort of it should be really brought to the public forum. What are those issues which are, because you cannot really expect everyone to be very, very familiar with the law. So it is important that some of those aspects or the report of the commission should really be placed before the larger public, make it available. At least they can't read the whole thing, but at least the key features of it, so that everyone has an informed ideas about what is their opinion, what is their positions, and so on and so forth. So that I think is an important, and to my mind, I feel that as far as the personal law or what is called the aspects of personal life, is something to do with also connected with the diversity in India. Diversity of language, diversity of religion, diversity of culture. And I think the Constitution itself makes various kinds of provisions. And one of the provisions is the provision of protecting them. It is sort of what is called protective discriminations, even in the aspects of their personal life. So I'm not really against the kind of this code. And for gender equality is one of the most foremost things that even the tribal community really need to think about it. But I think it should be a most, what I would call it, a kind of self-determined, in the sense that people must really determine it as to what exactly they really like, rather than being imposed. This kind of uniformity that we want to introduce everywhere across, without really taking their informed consent or informed decisions and consent by the, what is called the communities which are vulnerable, which are disadvantaged, in either in terms of number, or in terms of, let's say, economic or social and political status. I think there is a need to give some space to them. There's a need to give some assurance to them that there should be a freedom for them to decide. And as I said, gender equality is very, very important. And it is, people should really come forward. And then rather than imposing it that, this is what the Uniform Civil Code is and you do it. I think what I feel is a sort of a self-determinations by the communities which represent let's say, the vulnerable groups or disadvantaged groups, it could be religious minorities or linguistic minorities, etc. They must be given enough space for them to really make a decision. That's what I really feel about it.
You have also submitted your report examining the lives of Adivasis when the Prime Minister office has set up the commission in 2014. How far government has been serious on implementing your suggestions, which are very much related to the real life of Adivasi community, their health?
Committee report was a collective effort. It is not my own personal. There's a team, and it was a team that has really worked out. And we really worked very hard. But unfortunately, by the time we had submitted the report, the new regime really came up. And I think they have not taken it seriously. In fact, I know it that in the Rajya Sabha, number of times MPs raised questions about the status of the report. And the minister replied that we have sent it to the state governments for their views, for their observations, etc. But I think main problem with our report is that we were very particular about in terms of rights of the Adivasis, which have been constantly getting threatened. And there seems to be a big problem between the Ministry of Tribal Affairs and Ministry of Environment and Forest. I think, and that really, I don't know what exactly the status of it. It has not really been taken seriously about it. Yeah.
You feel sad that the real issue, which is related to the lives of Adivasi, that is not touched by the government, and only those debates are promoted, which can create more division in society?
I think so. You see, one of the problems that I see in India, as far as the tribal situation is concerned, and particularly more so in the peninsular India, or what you call the Middle India, or the fact is that it is the law itself which has really played a very adverse impact on the lives of the people, laws and policies. Also there have been a protective arrangement. For example, at least in the peninsular India, there were 10 states almost at the heart of India. They have the fifth schedule provisions. And the fifth schedule provisions, the governor had special power. And he is really the executive, and he is the one who is supposed to take care of the welfare and interests of the tribal communities. And it was his prerogative to say that any law passed by the parliament or a state legislature, whether those laws are actually in the interest of the welfare of the tribal communities. And therefore, if we felt that these were not in the interest and welfare of the communities, then you could not have applied it in the fifth schedule areas, or he could have brought it with a modification. But what you find in all through the 75 years, the governors really did not take the responsibility of being a sort of a guardian which has been entrusted in the Indian Constitution. So that has been a very, very devastating. And therefore, all kinds of laws which were detrimental to the interests of the tribal communities, or be it what is called the forest, particularly forest has been very, very important, and other kinds of laws. It has been just Trust Land Acquisition Act, etc. It's been thrust upon the Adivasis, as a result of which you find that they have lost their legitimate traditional rights, and they have almost, in a sense, through these laws, criminalized. And therefore, anytime there is an infringement of these laws, they are punished, they're put into the jail, they are fined, and so on and so forth. So I think there have been laws which have actually criminalized the tribal communities. And this is more so in terms of, let's say, the law related to the forest. And that's why you find that there were a lot of movements, and therefore movements towards to ensure that people have a right to determine their own life. And one of the things that it gave really rise to the movement, the Bharat Jan Andolan, in fact, and that really brought what is known as the what's called provisions of Panchayat extension to scheduled areas, what is known as a PESA. And PESA, for the first time, but it may just be at the village level, at the Gram Seva level, but nevertheless, it gives the Adivasis, the scheduled areas, a right, to govern as per their traditions, customary practices, traditional system of governance, and so on and so forth. And it also says that the state should not enact any kind of law which is not in tune with, let's say, these provisions in the PESA. So despite all that, you find that we are trying to bring now what is called the Uniform Civil Code. You are giving a kind of rights through PESA, you are giving a provision through Autonomous District Council. In fact, Autonomous District Council is very interesting because you find they have legislative, executive, and judicial power. And any law passed by parliament or state legislature is not applicable there, particularly on those subjects which are specified in the schedule. Similarly, in Nagaland, you have 371A, and in Mizoram, 371G, where you find that the act of the parliament cannot be applicable into those states unless the state legislature approves it and recognizes and applies it to their own state. So there are all these kinds of protective provisions are there by virtue of the fact that they constitute an ethnic minority. And therefore, one should really, particularly in the case of tribals, we must really see or must really take these provisions of protecting them, ensuring their identity and ensuring their interests much more seriously, rather than doing that. What we do with that, we try to just thrust upon them all those kind of generalized laws which actually adversely impact us. For example, if you take the what is called the Indian Forest Act, what does it do? It actually nullifies many of the provisions which have been there. So you take the what is called Land Acquisition Act. The amendment has come about 2013. But the fact is that because of the Land Acquisition Act, although there were protections in terms of, let's say in case of Jharkhand, you have Chhattisgarh Tenancy Act, you have Santhal Pargana Tenancy Act, which restricted the alienation of land from tribals to non-tribals. That has been that land, the alienation has been going on. But more importantly, land is being acquired left, right, and center, in these 5th scheduled areas, as a result of which you find that they're getting dispossessed. And therefore you find that the kind of law which is supposed to be, or which is thought about as a general law, as a law which really is good for the public, is actually in a way is very, very detrimental to communities, particularly in the case of the tribals, and more so in the case of the tribals in peninsular India. For example, autonomous district councils, or you find the special constitutional status which Nagaland and what is called the Manipur, Mizoram has. How do they really implement the Uniform Civil Code? We haven't really thought about. You are trying to impose a Uniform Civil Code when you find that there are constitutional provisions which doesn't permit in that way, because these laws will not be implemented on those areas. So I think there's a need to have a more nuanced understanding of it, taking into consideration let's say maybe religious minorities and ethnic minorities in the Northeast India, tribal minorities in North India, or tribals in the peninsular India. And there's a need to really think about it. To my mind, it seems that, rather than have a central law, I think working out a kind of law by the state probably will be much more appropriate, where you find that people will really be able to express themselves, rather than at the level of the center, where they are really just I don't know how they will be able to do it.
Sir, Prime Minister has recently said in BJP's workers meeting in Bhopal couple of days back that secular parties are provoking Muslims and they are giving misinformations about Uniform Civil Code. So he basically said that it is very much needed, and even he gave reference to Supreme Court also. But even the government is not serious about it. Had the government been serious, there must have been any draft. So why government, why establishment keep talking about these issues without any preparation, without any draft?
I don't know. This is basically a kind of a kind of politics, is a kind of what do you call, just create a kind of an environment that we want to push a Uniform Civil Code, and election is just really going to come. And therefore, I think they're creating a kind of environment of polarizations and so on and so forth. And it is very unfortunate. Issues like this, issues as sensitive as like this, cannot really be decided, cannot really be discussed and debated in this kind of an environment. And it is very, very unfortunate that it should really be taken up at a time when we are not really near the elections. That's what I really feel about it. So there is a need for a more what's called, there's a need for a clear-cut report or proposal that is there. Then only we can really what is called, provide certain kinds of clarifications. We can put a comment, but in general, we're just talking about, we're discussing it. But what exactly we're discussing, we don't even know about it, because what is it that government really wants it? There has to be something, a draft. Then only we can really go it and make a concrete suggestions. That's what I really feel about it.
Many Adivasi organizations have also said that if uniform civil code is imposed forcefully on them, it will negatively affect the integrity of this country also. So why government is not serious about those concerns?
I think, Abhay, I feel that, we had always valued diversity in the country. I think even the nationalist leadership, and during even the constituent assembly debates, they really valued the diversity, and diversity must really be respected. The people who belong to a different traditions or different religion or language or culture, they must feel at home. And I think everyone is concerned about their identity. And I think the issue of equality, which actually Uniform Civil Code really tries to address, that questions of equality must really be discussed within the community, and they must really try to address these questions of equality, particularly gender equality, rather than being imposed from. I think that would be more acceptable. Otherwise, you impose it, and I think it creates a lot of anxiety and tensions, and the fact that you are not really being taken into confidence of the people that we have. We don't even consult it. We don't even right to determine our lives. Democracy also means that you have a right to determine yourself, your life, your collectivity. In that sense, I think it's an important that there should be really what may be called free, fair, and informed consent before anything really comes.
Indian Constitution has also given commitment to upholding diversity and also protecting the special identity and needs of the people. That was the basis for unity of this country. And Adivasi is also very a special social group. We know it that since colonial days, they have been exploited, and even post-independence India, that exploitation has not fully stopped. And you have also said in your presentation also that left, right, center, all governments has come and go, but the conditions of Adivasis remain the same. So my question is, do you think that this Hindu right government had some agenda? They want to impose some kind of uniformity, some kind of their own notion of culture, their own tradition on Adivasi culture, who do not want that. They want to celebrate their own specific lifestyle. And even anthropologists, sociologists, scholars argue that we may call them uncivilized, but their way of life is much more civilized. Their social order is much more egalitarian than the mainstream society can claim to be. Do you think that there is any agenda that they want to do away with the special character of Adivasi culture, which somehow contradicts with caste-based order?
I think there is, in the sense, see, one thing why is that tribals are somewhat different categories of society. They are like a society. They are like Bengalis are a society, or the Udiyas are a society. Similarly, let's say a Santhal may be a society, a Burao may be a society. So, they represent a kind of a society. And therefore, they cannot really be equated in terms of caste. They are not really caste. They are a kind of a society. They belong to a society. Now, and therefore, you find they have a religion, and they have also what you call the customary systems. And therefore, you find there are certain things on which change is really going on. For example, you find that people are now become Christians. There are people who have become still trying to retain their own traditional religion. They have process of Hinduization. And you find that in the last 50, 60 years, there is an aggressive Hinduization process among the tribals that have really been going on. The problem is that I don't think, See, as far as the right wing is concerned, they are more concerned about the culture, about religion. They're not really concerned, more concerned about empowering them in terms of their rights over land, the resources, the equal participation in the education institutions, etc. So you just, give them certain kinds of support in terms of education, some health, more of a social welfare-oriented programs. But even social welfare-oriented programs are, as I said, it is not the way in which it is given. It's trying to draw you more into what you call the caste society. It is more in terms of what you call the Indian civilizational complex. Rather, so in a way, you're trying to take them away from the distinct social identity and trying to draw it, not even integrate them. Integration will be, you try to assimilate them in the larger Indian society. That's what the process really is going on. And therefore, you find this division, the division that has been created, the tribal society today is very, very unfortunate, actually. And this division is actually, in a sense, becoming detrimental to the interests of the tribal communities in terms of protecting their land, the resources, in terms of the advancement in higher education and educational institutions, in terms of quality of life, and so on. If you really look at it, you find is that the people where you find that the industries, the dams, irrigation projects, they're the poorest as far as the tribals are concerned. So, this development that has gone into this, the people say the development, but development is very enclaved kind of an economy. It has not really touched the tribals, and the benefit of all these projects, whether you talk of industry or dams or irrigations or Indian forest policy or what do you do, they have more adversely impacted them than given them benefit. So that's the kind of problem. So, but the right wing has just been interested in the culture part, that social part, cultural part, religious part. This is what they more do it. And I think in the process, they try to bring more division into it.
Some scholars have also argued that through uniform civil code, maybe the right-wing agenda is, the elite agenda is, the establishment wants that somehow the special provision, special constitutional arrangements which are there for Adivasi community, that can be changed, that can be modified, and it may lead to, or maybe the ways may be facilitated for easy acquisition of the lands, whatever little left to Adivasi community.
It is actually, in history, it has really happened. You just take that the British, or rather the East India Company, they introduced what is known as permanent zamindari settlement in Bengal. So what they introduced this, what is called the same settlement almost wherever they were under the control. So that basically meant that the land must be conferred on the landlord. They must be conferred, and therefore the people who were already the landowners, actually they became tenants. So you find this, the law, legislations, and the administration itself has played a very devastating role as per the tribals are concerned, particularly in the peninsular India. Yes, and that's why they rose in revolt. Tilka Maji and many, or you find there were all kinds of revolts almost from the early 19th century. These were all because their land was really going on, and their autonomy of governing themselves actually was being taken away by the British, because they were imposing their own rules and what is called their own law and the rules and regulations, which was alien. So it is in this context that the British, when they saw that there's too much of revolt and rebellion, and therefore they said that, well, I think they created this what is known as a non-regulated system, if I'm not mistaken, in 1822, which basically means that the law regulations which are there, which is for the larger, what's called the larger territory, will not be applicable into this non-regulated territory. And non-regulated, non-regulated territory, non-regulation really came up. And then subsequently that itself became a scheduled districts act, backward tracts, excluded and partially excluded areas, and then eventually become fifth and the sixth schedule. So British were very clever. On the one hand, you find that you are introducing uniform civil law. At the same time, you are trying to give protective arrangement and give an impression to the people that, we're trying to protect. And they were trying to protect more, trying to protect the tribals, not so much for love for them, but in order to see that the law and order is maintained. And they were trying to protect the tribals against the non-tribals. But in the process, they themselves were bringing out various kinds of laws which gradually taking away their lands. Let's say, for example, you take the, what is it called, the Forest Policy and the Indian Forest Act, introduced in the, it's called middle of the 19th century. So you find that in a way you are trying to protect. At the same time, you find that through laws, through certain kinds of measures, through you find that what's called state management of the forests. You are actually felling timber. You are really trying to what's called use it profit. You are felling the tree in order to bring the land under cultivation. So what you really do it is that you are taking away their rights through certain kinds of policies, certain kinds of laws. You started mining and all that. This all began. So what you find that you are also introducing a protective mechanism, and you are also introducing a generalized laws, which you are really trying to extend into them. And this generally, I feel that the protective laws are almost every time made a subservient to the generalized laws, which are, let's say, meant for the interest of the corporate or the interest of the state or interest of the larger public, what you call. So all kinds of protective laws which are there have always been subservient. So they are, and therefore you bring it in the name of growth, in the name of public purpose, they have what's called public good. You're imposing all that, and the benefit of being a public good or public purpose, it doesn't really go to the tribal people. Rather, they are paying the price for what you call the public good or public purposes or the needs of the growth. So people are really paying for what is called the growth. Growth is really coming up by and large through the extractions and exploitation of the resources. And where are the resources? Which are all you find in the tribal areas. So if you look at the level of education today, you find literacy is very low. Health indicators are again very poor. In fact, the poorest, what is called the development indicators, are actually in the very heart of India. You take Madhya Pradesh, you Rajasthan, you Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Odisha, you Telangana, Maharashtra, Gujarat. These are the areas where you find the tribal development indicators are really the lowest. And therefore, these are the areas supposed to be supposed to be a site for development, let's say in the 50s and 60s. What this development has done. So that's really, so rather than benefit of development going to tribals, they have paid the price. So, sometimes people say that, we have affirmative action, we have protective arrangement. I'm saying that affirmative actions and therefore reservations and all that they talk about it, the state really give the reservations. But then your affirmative action can only be affirmative if you are trying to improve from where they are. Rather, you are trying to make the living conditions, the livelihood, even in the worst kind of situations, by acquisition of land, by industries, and so on and so forth, and making them more vulnerable. How is it that is a possible of what is called the affirmative action? To me, it looks like, okay, we are giving you reservations, but in return, we'll take away your land, your forests, and resources. It's basically unequal exchange. Is a very exploitative arrangement which are there. And people think that reservation is being given. But if you look at a larger political complex or larger political economy, you find that tribals are giving more to the country, more to the India than they are actually receiving it. So it is a very, and particularly I can say with certainty in the case of the what is called the states, tribal inhabited states at the heart of India. It's very, very.
If I could summarize your argument, you have just said that anything which is brought out by the state in the name of uniform laws or anything which is imposed from the top, that is going to affect the lives of the most marginalized community very negatively.
It has done during colonial period. It has done in the post-independent India, and it continues to do that. But we are hardly interested in reversing that kind of process.
So you are saying that permanent settlement or all those colonial policies which were introduced for getting profits, uniform civil code, the way it is being projected, the way it is being debated, this is somehow continuation of the same legacy of disempowering people and taking their resources back.
Yes, only difference I find Abhay, is that during colonial period, I think the colonial period, they did not give anything to the tribals. They just tried to give a kind of protective arrangement. But in terms of giving education, health, they hardly bothered about it. They left it to the missionaries. And even the missionaries, they used to give them some grants. Now, but then they took a lot. They took a lot from them. As I said, the forests which they were living there, they became what's called illegal occupants, the land that really went. So the colonialism persisted. But even a post-independent India, you find that at least they gave something to tribals. What is they gave? They gave education, they gave health, and they gave, let's say, representations in employment, in jobs, and so on and so forth. So there has been some way in which they have given. But then they have also taken. Because in the post-independent India also, they followed the same policy which the colonial India or colonial British India really followed it. So as far as the policy in terms of law, it is no different than what was really being pursued. Only you find that there has been some effort to integrate them. But rather than integrating them, you find that they are more of assimilating them. Integration means that you are preserving their identity. And at the same time, they are really becoming a part. But what you have been doing is that you are actually in a way assimilating them. You are assimilating through language. How is it that the tribals, whereas in the Northeast, people learn their mother tongue, they learn through English, and they can speak English, they can retain their language. But in the whole of the peninsular India, you always learn through the language of the dominant regional community. So in Bengal, you will read through Bengalis, in let's say, or in other places, Hindi or Telugu or Odia. And what really happening to tribal language? So that is one of the most important instrument of really you are trying to make them a kind of an occupational category, a kind of creating a kind of cultural society or cultural category to making them a kind of an economic category. Sometimes I find that not only in terms of land, forest, and other resources, but also in terms of the culture, the language particularly more important. Also, you find that there's so much of assimilating in this whole agenda of the Indian state to identify them as Hindus. Now, this was not the case. How is it that in the census, when there were early in the colonial period, there was a column for the animism or tribal religion, you did away with the post-independent India. Now, when people are making claim for a certain religion, etc., you're not even trying to recognize. You are all saying that they're Hindus. But as I said, the customary practice, as far as the tribals are concerned, is nothing to do with religion. So their identity doesn't come from the religion. Their identity comes from the language and the customary practices. And therefore, you find a tribal can be as much a Hinduized as Sarna, and he can be a Christian, but he remains a tribal. This whole idea that, when you are changed, you are losing their identity. No, who's losing their identity? Tribal identity remains intact so long as they are, let's say, into certain kinds of belongingness, a solidarity. Now, that solidarity is, in a way, certain attempt is being made to erode it in terms of language, in terms of, but eroding the language, particularly in terms of religion. So religion has become an instrument of divisive forces now, as far as the tribe is concerned. But this a tribal like anyone, he can be Christian, and he can be Hinduized and maybe identified as Hindu. But even if he's Hindu, identifies as a tribe, why should he identify? So if he identifies himself as an Hindu, he should identify himself as a caste rather than the tribe. So you find that there's possibility for us to socially differentiate it. We can become a Christian, we can become an Hinduized, we become a Sarna, we can even become maybe a Muslim. That is possible. But tribal identity remains intact. So we remain as a society. As I always give an example, if a Bengali, they are Muslims, they are Hindus, they are become the low caste, do they really cease to be Bengali? If a Santhal, there is a social differences within them, does he cease to be a Santhal? He remains a Santhal. An Urao or Angami Naga, he remains even though they are undergoing change. So you can't really expect, typically you find that a tribal means, that the society has undergone change, and therefore talk about in terms of primitivism, uncivilized. because they are no longer civilized, they are no longer tribes. So there's one way people say that they are no longer tribals now because they have become what's called educated, they become no longer wear those kind of clothes which we are wearing. No, this kind of an argument, this kind of observations, these are all very superficial. This doesn't really help.
Sir, I want to repeat what you have said. That is very important point, that Indian constitutions says that cultural diversity is part of our fundamental rights and religious freedom. And the religion of Adivasi community, or at least a section of Adivasi community who want to be registered under Sarna Dharma, that is not being allowed. The ruling establishment is imposing uniformity on tribal community.
That's right. No, I think the demand for a sarna, which you find that there is a very strong segment of the populations which believe that they're practicing the traditional religion. That basically means that we are not really Hindus. So the distinction is being drawn by them, by calling them sarna, which means they are practicing their traditional religion as against the religion which is really what is called an Hindu. And there is a not only different in terms of ideology, in terms of rituals, in terms of what is called the theological principles, or whatever you say, ideas, or what is called the ideas, practices and rituals. It's different. So you can't really call a sarna as an Hindu. So you know, the Hindu only becomes when you start accepting the tenets and the organizational structure, or the values, the gods and goddesses, and the ideas of gods and goddesses of those, then you find. You can't really just say that just because they are what is called sarna. This is basically, I always think it is kind of civilizational imperialism. In the sense that any difference is just try to incorporate them, try to include them. You know, that doesn't really work. It's a kind of imperialistic tendency you have there. Just if you are not really Christian, if not really Muslim, you are Hindu. Now, this is a civilizational imperialism, nothing else. I say it's all civilizational colonization.
Sir, I would like to ask two more questions. One about the customary laws of the Adivasi community. Sir, we know it very well that the lifestyle of Adivasi community is more egalitarian than any civilized society can claim to be. But even a section of Adivasi community, particularly women, they have expressed their concern that some of the customary laws of Adivasi community, they do not give equal rights to women as far as property is concerned after marriage. How could we keep cultural diversity, we protect the special customary practices of Adivasi community, at the same time also we should stand with the women of that community also? How to make that balance, sir?
This is a very important point as far as the tribal societies or even or Adivasi societies are concerned. I think world is changing and we are also changing. And I think there is within the customary law or traditions, there is a inequality. Gender inequality in tribal societies is pervasive. Let's accept it, that they don't have an equal opportunity for them. So in public domain, they don't have a space to participate. In inheritance, there are problems. There are also sometimes evils within the tribal society, certain social evils like witch hunting. If you find that people are falling ill, you identify someone as a witch, and then you brand them as witch, and therefore haunt them, and so on and so forth. So there are problems within tribal society. I'm not at all saying that the tribal society there is a certain degree of egalitarianism, but there are also, you find that gender inequality is pervasive. That is there, and that needs to be addressed. But my problem is that if the people should be really be able to make a decision, because they themselves are undergoing change. Men have undergone change. Men are, once upon a time they were just cultivators. Now they become educated. You are doing trades, you are doing business, and so on and so forth. You wear pants, you wear ties, but you expect and you aspire for something else. Why can't women aspire? I think women must be given an opportunity, and I think gender equality is something which Adivasi societies must take very seriously, and they must reform rather than being imposed by the other societies. I feel that the gender equality, and therefore in terms of the uniform civil code is something important, which I think the tribal themselves must bring about a kind of reform. So they know it, that they themselves have decided, and they will say that this has not really been imposed, but it is something like a self-determined. I go to that extent, and therefore we have to find out an institutional mechanism, a kind of what is called a space where you find that the tribals have a say in terms of reforming some sort of inadequacies that inheres in the what's called customs and traditions. And I think gender inequality is one of them, which is really true, particularly in terms of inheritance, in terms of political participation, that is very, very important. And also you find that the certain kinds of evil, and particularly witch hunting, and which I think that's very, very unfortunate things among the tribal society. And people, as they're becoming educated, must take a very serious note of those things and see that, you know, this gender discriminations or gender disparity is really done away with.
Sir, will you suggest some ways that can help in strengthening those voices from the Adivasi community? We should not support something which is being imposed from the outside, but how could we stand in solidarity with the women from the community who are struggling for their own rights, for equality, for gender justice?
Yeah. Now, I feel that, you know, what is called certain kinds of drafts can always be prepared. You know, there are now people from the tribal communities who are lawyers, who are academics, who are administrators. So they can really work out what are those areas which I think the tribal society need to rectify. What are the areas and what kind of provisions they really will go. They just can't hide under the under the customary or tradition. All customs and traditions, they are dynamics, they undergo change. They can't really be static. So if at all what customs is there, there's been the dynamics. And therefore, as the society is progressing, the customary traditions, customary laws also needs to be kept in tune with it. But then I feel that on these issues, it is the tribals themselves who have to decide, who have to determine, and for which I think they have to work out a kind of an institutional arrangement. For example, maybe the state governments, they can create a facilitate it. These are the issues which I think, and I think the initiative must go from the tribals, that, you know, educated tribals, people who really feel about it, they must really initiate these things, and let consensus be created, maybe at the Gram Sabha, at the Padha Sabha. So, you know, this kind of consensus has to be created, and a kind of draft can be worked out, and or you find a state or a committee can be constituted, they can pick a draft, circulate it, discuss in the Gram Sabha, discuss among the people, come at a consensus, and I think they can really implement it. So we call it tribal society, definitely in terms of larger Indian society is egalitarianism, but you find that gender discrimination or gender inequality is pervasive. And also you find that as we are moving, what is called, as the tribal society is advancing, you find that inequality within the tribal society is also increasing now, not only in terms of education, but also in terms of accumulation of wealth. You know, people have either in terms of educations and income, and then land and other things, or trade, business, etc. So you find people are becoming very wealthy, but at the same time there are people who are really at very poor level, level of poor living conditions. So that are there. So I think the development is there. That the inequality which is emerging in terms of access that people have either to education or the trade or business, that is one kind of inequality is emerging. But the other kind of inequality that you find is gender, and which is pervasive. And the most important is that there are certain kinds of very unfortunate practices, particularly, as I said, witch hunting and all that, which have been there in tribal society, not only in the peninsular India, but in many parts of India.
Sir, the final and concluding remarks. If government of India is listening to our voice, what would be your suggestions as a scholar, as a person who has studied the problems of Adivasi community for several decades, and you have headed a commission, looked into the real problems of Adivasi community? What is your suggestions?
You know, Abhay, my only suggestion is that respect the and follow the constitution in letter and spirit, and also follow the rules which are meant for the welfare and promote the interests of the tribals in terms of letter and spirit. So let's say Forest Act, the PESA, the amendment which was brought about in Land Acquisition Act in 2013. You find that Swarnakpur Tenancy Act, you have Santal Pregnant Tenancy Act, you have acts, let's say in different states where you find that you are trying to restrict the alienation of land from tribals and non-tribals. So I think these are the laws are there, and there's a constitutional provision. So you find that I just expect that the India or Indian state or even the provincial state just respects Indian constitutions, the kind of provision which have been made for them in letter and spirit, as well as the laws which have been meant for their welfare and the protections, that they respect the letter and spirit. And if that is the case, you find that then many of the generalized laws have to really synchronize themselves in terms of the interests of the tribal communities. What is really now happening is that more of these protective laws, which are meant for the tribals, they are being sacrificed. They are being sacrificed at the altar of more generalized laws. And you think that generalized laws is something applicable for the whole of India, the whole populations, and you think that it is sort of reflective of what is called larger public good. But in this larger public good, you find there are people who have been vulnerable since during colonial period. They've been vulnerable in the post-independent India. They're vulnerable today. They are being sacrificed into this larger scheme of things. And I feel that one single advice that I have is that the constitutional provision meant for scheduled tribes and the laws and legislation which have been worked out, which tries to protect them, they must really be respected and honored and implemented in letter and spirit. That's the message that I have.
Sir, we have learned very important thing on this current debate on Uniform Civil Code. And you have said that how the state and the ruling establishment through uniform laws have tried to take away the rights of the people. Your suggestions are also important. Sir, you have definitely brought a new dimension to the whole debate. Thank you very much for talking and giving us wonderful information, Professor Virginius Xaxa.
Thank you, Abhay. Thank you.